It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. My friends and I had been planning this camping trip for months. We were all excited to get away from the city and spend a few days in the wilderness. We chose a remote location in the mountains, far away from any towns or villages. We were looking for a true escape, a chance to disconnect from our busy lives and reconnect with nature. The first day was everything we had hoped for. The weather was perfect, the scenery was breathtaking, and the air was crisp and clean. We set up our tents, built a campfire, and spent the evening telling stories and laughing. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, a sense of tranquility washed over us. The stars were incredibly bright, more so than we'd ever seen before, and their brilliance filled the night sky. We felt a profound sense of peace and awe at the majesty of the universe. The second day started much the same. We went for a hike in the mountains, discovering hidden waterfalls and breathtaking vistas. The natural beauty around us was both invigorating and humbling. We felt a deep connection to the earth and a profound sense of gratitude for the chance to experience this incredible place. That night, we decided to have a bonfire. The flames crackled and danced in the darkness, casting flickering shadows on our faces. We shared stories, reminisced about old times, and made plans for the future. We laughed. We cried. We shared dreams and fears. We felt a powerful sense of camaraderie, a bond strengthened by the shared experiences and the beauty of our surroundings. It was the kind of night that creates lasting memories. As the hours slipped by, however, an unusual quiet descended upon our campsite. The birds had stopped their evening songs, and the usual sounds of the night were absent. An eerie stillness enveloped us, and an uncomfortable feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched. Then the whispers started. Faint at first, barely audible above the crackling of the fire, they seemed to come from all around us. We initially dismissed them as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to weave themselves into our conversations, interrupting our laughter and replacing our joy with a chilling dread. The whispers were not just sounds. They felt as though they were penetrating our very thoughts, intruding on our minds, filling us with a sense of overwhelming dread. We felt a growing unease, a creeping fear that turned our excitement into a deep-seated anxiety. The tranquil beauty of our surroundings had vanished, replaced by a palpable sense of foreboding. We tried to ignore the whispers. We sang songs, told jokes, anything to distract ourselves from the growing unease. But the whispers persisted, their chilling presence making our blood run cold. We huddled closer to the fire, its warmth a meager shield against the encroaching darkness and the chilling whispers that seemed to want to consume us. As the night wore on, the whispers intensified. They seemed to coalesce into words, fragments of sentences that we couldn't quite decipher, but that sent shivers down our spines. It was as if unseen entities were trying to communicate with us, their message shrouded in mystery and dread. Then we saw it. A flicker of movement in the darkness at the edge of the firelight. A figure tall and gaunt emerged from the shadows. Its features were obscured by the darkness, but we could make out a long, bony figure that seemed to move with unnatural grace. The air grew heavy with fear as we stared at this mysterious figure, caught between fascination and horror. It didn't approach us directly. Instead, it remained at the edge of our firelight, its presence looming over us, a palpable sense of menace radiating from its shadowy form. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, seemingly emanating from the figure itself. The silence of the night was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the insidious, haunting whispers. We couldn't move, couldn't speak. Our fear paralyzed us, and our eyes remained fixed on the dark figure, our minds struggling to comprehend what we were witnessing. The night felt endless, and the air heavy with dread and foreboding. Finally, as the first rays of dawn pierced the darkness, the figure retreated into the shadows. The whispers faded, leaving behind an unnerving silence that felt even more frightening than the whispers themselves. We sat there trembling and exhausted, our minds racing to make sense of what had just occurred. We packed up our camp as quickly as possible, our movements hurried and clumsy. We barely spoke, the shared experience having left us speechless. As we drove away, we glanced back at the campsite, expecting to see the figure again, but there was nothing. just the untouched beauty of nature, serene and peaceful, as though nothing unusual had transpired. But the experience left an indelible mark on us. The memory of the chilling whispers and the shadowy figure haunted our dreams for years to come. We never returned to that campsite, and we never spoke much about what happened. It was an experience that we could never fully comprehend, an encounter with something that defied explanation. To this day, I still wonder what we experienced that night. Was it a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the isolation of the wilderness? Or was it something far more sinister, something that dwells in the shadows and whispers to those who venture too far into the unknown? I don't know the answer, and perhaps it's better that I don't. The memory, however, remains a stark reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the reach of our understanding, a darkness that can invade our very thoughts and fill our minds with the chilling whispers of unspeakable dread. The beauty of nature can be overwhelming, but it's a beauty that sometimes carries with it a terrifying undercurrent, a dark secret that only whispers its name to those who dare to listen. It was a Friday afternoon, and my best friend Mike and I were finally on our way to the woods. For years we had talked about going on an adventurous camping trip, but life always had a way of getting in the way. Now that we had both graduated from college and had steady jobs, we were determined to make our dream a reality. After doing some research, we decided on a place called Blackwood Forest, a vast wilderness area known for its dense trees, mysterious caves, and the occasional unexplained phenomena. When we arrived at the park entrance, we were immediately struck by the eerie quiet of the place. There was hardly any sign of civilization, just tall, imposing trees that seemed to loom over us. The park ranger, an older man with deep-set eyes, gave us a pamphlet with some safety tips and a slightly ominous warning about staying away from the old abandoned mine shaft, which was said to be haunted. We didn't pay much attention to him. After all, we were two grown men who were not afraid of any ghosts or goblins. We were excited and thought it would be a great story to tell later on. We drove into the forest for about 30 minutes, and the scenery became increasingly surreal. The trees grew taller and thicker, their branches intertwining to form a dense canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. It felt as if the forest itself was closing in on us, and a growing sense of unease started to creep into my heart. We eventually found a suitable spot to pitch our tent, a small clearing near a gurgling stream. It was late in the afternoon, and shadows were beginning to grow long, casting eerie shapes on the forest floor. As we set up camp, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every now and then we heard strange noises like branches snapping or rocks rolling down a hill, but whenever we turned to look for the source, there was nothing. After we had finished setting up camp, we decided to take a walk to explore the area. The forest floor was covered in a thick layer of moss, which made the walking difficult. The air was damp and heavy with the smell of decaying leaves and damp earth. The trees seemed to be closing in on us, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. As we walked, we started to notice strange markings on the trees, strange symbols that looked like ancient runes. We couldn't decipher them, but they gave us an unsettling feeling. We had read some folklore about the forest before our trip, and we remembered stories about ancient cults who performed rituals in the area. These markings seemed to confirm these legends. As darkness descended, the forest became even more ominous. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the hooting of an owl. The temperature had dropped sharply, and we could feel a cold wind blowing through the trees, sending shivers down our spines. Suddenly, we both heard a rustling sound in the bushes nearby. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests, and stared into the darkness. A pair of glowing yellow eyes appeared, then disappeared. We stood there for a long time, not daring to move, hoping it would go away on its own. A few minutes later, we heard a high-pitched scream in the distance. It was chilling, filled with pure terror. It sent shivers down our spines. We exchanged glances, both of our eyes filled with fear. We agreed to go back to the camp immediately and stay put for the rest of the night. Back at the campsite, we decided to build a fire, not only to ward off the cold but also to feel safer. The fire crackled and popped, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. We sat around the fire, telling stories to keep our spirits up and our minds off the unsettling experience we just had. As the night went on, we heard other strange noises, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and an occasional guttural growl. Each sound made our hearts pound in our chests and sent a shiver down our spines. We both felt uneasy, as if something else was lurking in the shadows. Every few minutes, one of us would jump at a strange sound and then apologize for being so jumpy. As dawn approached, the noises gradually died down. The sky was beginning to lighten, and the forest began to lose some of its sinister aura. We were exhausted, but relieved. We quickly packed our things, happy to be leaving this eerie place behind us. As we were walking to the car, we looked back at the campsite. To our surprise, we found a strange symbol carved into the ground near our tent. It was the same strange symbol that we had seen on the trees. Later that day, as we were driving back, we passed a small town where we stopped to eat lunch at a restaurant. An elderly waitress came to take our order. During our conversation, we mentioned our camping trip and the unsettling experiences we had. Her eyes widened as she listened to our story. She revealed that Blackwood Forest had a dark history. She told us about the mysterious disappearances of people, the ancient rituals of cults, and the haunting legends of the forest. She warned us to never go back to that forest again and to forget our trip. It was then that we finally understood the magnitude of our encounter and how lucky we had been to escape with our lives. It was the end of our camping adventure, and we knew it was time to get back to civilization. The images of the glowing eyes, the strange markings, and the terrifying scream stayed with us for a long time. We knew we would never forget our experience in Blackwood Forest, an experience that changed our perspective on the mysteries and the darkness that lies within nature's embrace. It was a frightening reminder of the forces that may dwell in the unseen world, and how small and insignificant we can be when faced with the unknown. Despite this scary experience, this trip brought us closer than ever. It helped us to better understand our limitations and strengthened the bond we shared. We'll always remember the forest, not for its beauty, but for its chilling story, one that we will share with caution whenever we recall our ill-fated camping adventure in the haunted depths of Blackwood Forest. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, a fragrance I usually found comforting, but tonight it felt suffocating, clinging to me like a shroud. The crackling campfire, usually a source of warmth and companionship, now seemed to cast long dancing shadows that writhed and pulsed with an unnatural life. We were deep in the Redwood National Park, miles from the nearest town, celebrating my 21st birthday with my closest friends, Liam, Maya, and Ben. It was supposed to be a weekend of laughter, storytelling, and the kind of camaraderie that only comes from shared experiences in the wilderness. Instead, it became a night I'll never forget. A night that etched itself into my memory with the chilling precision of a carving knife. We'd chosen a secluded spot, a small clearing nestled between two ancient redwoods, their towering presence both majestic and intimidating in the deepening twilight. The firelight flickered on their rough, textured bark, revealing glimpses of what looked like gnarled faces peering back at us. Liam, ever the practical one, had insisted on bringing a satellite phone, and we'd checked in with our families earlier that evening, assuring them we were safe. But even his reassurance couldn't quell the growing unease that settled upon us as darkness enveloped the clearing. The sounds of the forest amplified in the silence. The rustling of leaves became whispers, the hooting of owls transformed into mocking laughter, and the snap of a twig echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. Maya, usually the bravest of us, huddled closer to the fire, her eyes wide and reflecting the flickering flames. Ben, typically the jovial one, was unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on the dense woods surrounding us. I tried to mask my own apprehension, but a prickling feeling of dread was creeping up my spine. It started subtly, a feeling of being watched. I'd glance into the shadows, convinced I saw movement, a flicker of something dark, something tall and slender, slipping between the trees. I'd tell myself it was just the play of light and shadow, a trick of the mind, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. Then came the sounds, low, guttural growls that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest. They were unlike any animal I'd ever heard. A sound primal and unsettling, a mixture of rage and hunger that sent shivers down my spine. The growls intensified, punctuated by the rhythmic cracking of branches growing closer with each passing minute. Liam, despite his outwardly calm demeanor, was clearly unnerved. He kept glancing at his watch, then at the satellite phone, his jaw tight. "Maybe we should pack up and head back," he suggested, his voice barely a whisper. But before anyone could respond, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the night air. It was a woman's scream, filled with pure, unadulterated terror. It echoed through the woods, seemingly bouncing off the ancient trees, ending abruptly as if cut short by a brutal force. Panic seized us. We huddled together, our faces pale and drawn. The growls resumed, now closer, more menacing. The sounds were accompanied by a scratching, scraping noise that seemed to be coming from directly behind us. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, expecting to see whatever had made that horrific scream, expecting to see the source of the terrifying sounds. There was nothing. But the feeling of being watched intensified. It was like something unseen, something malevolent was pressing against our backs, radiating an aura of suffocating dread. I could feel its presence, a palpable weight in the air, a chilling energy that seeped into my bones. Liam fumbled with the satellite phone, but the signal was weak, broken. He tried again and again, his frustration growing with each failed attempt. "It's no use," he muttered, his voice trembling. "We're completely cut off." The growls grew louder, closer. We could hear the snapping of twigs, the rustling of leaves, the sound of something large moving through the undergrowth towards us. I could smell it now, a sickeningly sweet stench, like decaying flesh and damp earth. The hair on my arms stood on end. Then a shadow passed over us. A tall, dark shadow, larger than any human being, moving with an unnatural grace and silence. It stretched across the clearing, blocking out the firelight, casting us into an oppressive darkness. We couldn't see it clearly, but its presence was overwhelmingly powerful. A suffocating weight that crushed the breath from our lungs. We didn't see what it was, not truly. But the feeling of utter primal fear, the knowledge that something immensely powerful and malevolent was near, was enough. It filled us with a terror so deep, so profound, that it defied description. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow receded. The growls faded into the distance, replaced by an unnerving silence. We sat there frozen in fear, our hearts pounding like war drums, our breath catching in our throats. The fire had died down to embers, leaving us in an almost complete darkness. It took what felt like an eternity before we could move, before we could speak. When we finally did, our voices were shaky, our words hesitant. We gathered our belongings, our movements clumsy and hurried, and fled the clearing, running blindly through the woods. Our fear guiding our steps more than any sense of direction. We didn't look back. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the forest, until the familiar lights of the highway greeted us like beacons of hope. We were bruised, scratched, and exhausted. But more than anything, we were terrified. We never went back to that clearing. We never spoke much about that night. The memory too painful, too terrifying to revisit. The silence between us became a testament to what we had experienced, a shared secret that bound us together through the unspoken horrors of that night. The satellite phone remained broken, a permanent reminder of our isolation, our vulnerability, the scream, the growls, the shadow. They remain etched in my memory, a recurring nightmare that haunts me to this day. Was it a bear? A mountain lion? Some other animal? Or something far, far more sinister? I don't know. And maybe, in the deepest recesses of my mind, I don't want to know. The truth, whatever it may be, is far more terrifying than any fiction could ever conjure. The experience changed us, leaving us with a profound respect for the wild, a deep-seated understanding of the unseen terrors that lurk in the shadows of the ancient forests, and a chilling reminder that some things are better left unknown. The woods still whisper even now, years later, and sometimes in the quiet of the night, I still hear the echoes of that scream. I've always loved the idea of camping. There's something about escaping into the wilderness that speaks to me, A chance to get away from the distractions of the modern world and be surrounded by nature's untouched beauty. It was a tradition for me and my friends every summer. We'd pick a remote location, somewhere deep within the woods, far from any civilization, and spend a weekend unwinding under the stars. Little did I know this trip would be our last. It all began when my childhood friend Eric suggested a new spot he had heard about from a coworker. It was deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a place called Hollow Creek. The name itself didn't raise any red flags, but the way he described it made me feel a sense of foreboding that I brushed off at the time. It's a secluded site, practically untouched, Eric had said, his voice brimming with excitement. No trails lead to it. You have to navigate through the forest, but once you get there, it's like a different world. Dense trees, a crystal clear stream, and total silence. No one around for miles. The idea sounded perfect. The more isolated, the better, I thought. We decided on a weekend in early October when the weather was cool and the autumn leaves were just beginning to change. There would be 6 of us. Eric, his girlfriend Sarah, Ben, Mia, and Anna, who was my fiancée at the time. We packed our tents, sleeping bags, and supplies, ready for what we thought would be just another thrilling adventure. The first day of the trip went off without a hitch. We parked our cars at a ranger station and hiked into the forest, navigating through unmarked trails, using Eric's GPS to guide us. The journey was long and strenuous, but the anticipation kept our spirits high. By late afternoon, we arrived at the clearing Eric had described. It was everything he'd promised. Majestic oaks towered above us, their branches interlocking to create a natural canopy. A small stream trickled nearby, its sound soothing amidst the forest's deep silence. We set up camp quickly, pitching our tents in a semicircle around a makeshift fire pit. As night fell, we gathered around the crackling fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Laughter echoed through the woods. The stars above twinkled brightly, and for a moment, I felt truly at peace. But as the hours passed and the fire died down, an eerie stillness settled over the campsite. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, seemed to disappear, replaced by an oppressive silence. "Do you hear that?" Mia suddenly asked, breaking the quiet. "What?" I replied, straining my ears. "Exactly," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Nothing. It's like the woods just stopped." We all fell silent, listening intently. She was right. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath as if anticipating something. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was unsettling, but we shrugged it off. We were in the middle of nowhere. Maybe it was just our nerves playing tricks on us. We retreated to our tents, wishing each other a good night. And soon the only sound was the soft rustle of sleeping bags as we all settled in. I lay there, staring at the ceiling of my tent, a vague sense of unease preventing me from falling asleep. Then, around midnight, I heard it, a low, guttural growl. It was faint at first, almost like a distant animal call, but as it repeated, it grew louder, reverberating through the trees. My heart started pounding. I turned to Anna, but she was fast asleep. Not wanting to wake her, I sat up slowly and strained to hear. The growl seemed to be circling the camp, moving from one side to the other as if something or someone was stalking us. I unzipped the tent cautiously, peeking out into the dark forest. I couldn't see anything beyond the faint outlines of the other tents, but the growling continued. Then, it stopped. Complete silence again. I waited, holding my breath, my senses on high alert. "Is someone out there?" I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. A few seconds passed. Then, without warning, a shriek erupted from somewhere deep in the woods, echoing through the night. It wasn't an animal's cry. It was human, agonized and desperate, the sound of someone in mortal terror. My blood ran cold. I scrambled out of the tent, grabbing the flashlight, and rushed toward the source. "Guys, wake up!" I shouted, panic gripping me. One by one, the others emerged, looking disoriented and frightened. We huddled together, staring into the darkness where the scream had come from. "Did you hear that?" Ben asked, his voice shaky. "Yeah, what the hell was that?" Eric muttered. I don't know, I replied, shining my flashlight around frantically, but it sounded like someone was out there. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting, listening. But there was nothing. No more screams, no growls, not even a whisper of wind. Just silence. I suggested we stay close to the fire, but Eric shook his head. We should go check it out. What if someone's hurt? I don't think that's a good idea, Sarah interjected, her face pale. It could be dangerous, but Eric was adamant. With a reluctant sigh, Ben and I agreed to go with him, while the girls stayed back at the camp. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find, pocket knives, a hatchet, and set off into the woods, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The trees loomed around us, their shadows stretching like fingers across the ground. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the air seemed to become. There was a strange smell in the air, like decaying leaves mixed with something else, something metallic. We pressed on, following the trail until we reached a small clearing. There, in the center, was a campsite, or what was left of it. The tents were shredded, pieces of fabric hanging from the branches. The fire pit was cold, the ashes scattered, and on the ground, smeared across the dirt and leaves, was a dark, sticky substance. Blood, Ben whispered, his face ashen. Panic surged through me. Someone had been here. Someone, or something, had attacked them. We spun around, shining our lights in every direction, but the woods were empty. No sign of movement, no tracks, nothing but the eerie remnants of a violent struggle. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice trembling. Right now. But as we turned to leave, another scream tore through the night. Closer this time. It was coming from our camp. Anna, I shouted, fear propelling me forward. We sprinted back, crashing through the underbrush, adrenaline fueling every step. When we burst into our clearing, the scene was chaos. The tents were overturned, the fire scattered, and the girls were nowhere to be seen. Anna, I screamed, my heart in my throat. Silence. I spun around, frantically searching, but they were gone. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shadow slipping between the trees, something tall and thin, almost human, but not quite. It disappeared before I could get a good look, melting into the darkness. Did you see that? Ben gasped, his eyes wide with terror. What? What was that? Eric stammered. I don't know, I whispered. But we have to find them. We split up, calling their names, our voices echoing through the empty forest. But it was like they had vanished into thin air. No trace of them, no sound. Just that same, suffocating silence. Hours passed. Desperation clawed at my chest. Then, just as dawn began to break, I found her. Anna was lying at the base of a tree, her eyes staring blankly up at the sky, her body twisted at an unnatural angle. I collapsed beside her, sobbing uncontrollably. There were no wounds, no blood, just lifelessness, as if the life had been drained from her. The others were never found. We left Hollow Creek that morning, broken and traumatized. We never spoke about it again. Not to each other, not to anyone else. But I can still hear that scream in my nightmares, the scream of whatever it was that took them. And sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I can still feel its presence. Watching. Waiting.